so I'm standing here along the scenic Highway 41, very busy highway this time of year, and I'm here with my telephoto lens. I'm not looking for wildlife today, I'm looking for landscapes. And so what I want to try to do today is talk to you about how and why I use a telephoto lens to capture landscapes, including panoramics. Okay, so one of the things about photographing from this highway is that most of the points of interest, like this tree that you see way off in the distance, are very, very far away. And so I find that using a wide-angle lens really doesn't capture that scene well enough. Let me give you an example. Here's a shot I took of those trees at 24 millimeters. Now compare that to a shot that was taken at a much greater focal length, and you can see that by isolating that scene, zooming in on it, I got a more interesting sky to frame that point of interest. And here's a vertical version of that as well. So I love to use my telephoto for landscapes down here for that reason. And I wanted to share today my techniques for doing that and also describe the advantages of using a telephoto for landscapes as well as getting panoramic shots. Okay, so typically when we get out there to shoot landscape shots, we tend to bring our wide-angle lens, and here I have a wide angle that you can compare to the telephoto. So why is it that I prefer the telephoto? Well, first let's talk about two really big differences between the wide angle and the telephoto. The first difference is the angle of view. With the telephoto, you're going to get a much narrower angle of view, which means that everything is going to look closer. These trees are going to look closer to you. The distance between objects are going to look closer, and essentially what that's doing is it's compressing the scene. Here's an example of a shot I took in Iowa. Everything you see in the frame here is far, far away from me, but yet everything looks relatively close. Just the opposite of that is the wide-angle lens, which is going to exaggerate the distance between objects and between you and the objects. So everything's going to look farther away. And that's great if you have a strong foreground and you can get close to it, and that will just kind of lead you into the background. Okay, so the other difference is that with the wide-angle lens, you get a distortion, especially around the edges, where everything tends to look like it's being stretched into the scene. Best way to show you this is take a look at this example where I shot this with a wide-angle lens, and you notice that the trees look slanted. Okay, that's that distortion effect. And compare that now to a telephoto lens shot from basically the same area. You can see everything looks flat. The trees are standing upright as we see them. So essentially, the telephoto is capturing a landscape more realistically, and to me, it looks kind of like a painting, you know, the way a landscape painter would have seen that scene and had painted it that way. Okay, so because of the two differences between the telephoto and the wide angle, I have a lot of advantages that come with the telephoto. First of all, I have an additional advantage because I use a zoom telephoto. So this telephoto takes me from 70 to 400. So that's a lot of focal length options that I can use when I'm out here. Okay, the other advantage, because of that narrower angle of view, okay, I can take an entire scene and I can divide it up into pieces, and I can zoom in on pieces of the scene, and I have a lot of options as far as compositions and just finding points of interest. Okay, the other advantage of having a narrower angle of view is that I can get rid of the boring stuff. When you come out here and you have a wide angle and you've got this big sky in front of you and it's kind of void of anything interesting, it can make the shot boring. So with the telephoto, I can kind of zoom in and just get rid of all that boring stuff. The other great advantage of the telephoto is that I can easily switch from horizontal to vertical compositions. Okay, another advantage of the telephoto lens is that you can more easily stitch together images and form a panoramic with them. And the reason for that is because you don't have that parallax effect that you get with the wide-angle lens. Now, what do I mean by parallax effect? I think I can show you better than I can explain it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for two objects in front, that one is in front of the other. So one is closer to me and one is farther away, and they're relatively lined up with each other in the frame. And I'm going to put both objects in the middle, and I'm going to take a shot. Then I'm going to pan over so that those same two objects are over to the left. I'm going to pan over again so that they're way over to the right of the frame. Looking at those three images and those two objects, you can see that the relative distance between them looks the same in each of those frames. If I had shot that with a wide-angle lens, it would not look like that at all. In each frame, those two objects would appear much differently to each other than with the telephoto. So because of that, that makes it easier to put those images together to form one. Now there's equipment to get around that, but with the telephoto you don't really need that. So here's an example from a couple examples from Iowa where I stitched 2 or 3 images to form panoramics. So that's pretty cool that we can do that. And I've even taken that one step further, and I've done stitching with vertically oriented images as well. So I would get my shot, and then I would come up, pan upwards, and get another shot. So here's a couple examples. Here's one where I took two shots, and then the next one I actually took 3 and stitched them together. And you can see Photoshop Merge did a pretty good job with those. Okay, so just a few things to think about if you're using telephoto lenses. First of all, if you're using a lens this size or bigger, you're likely not going to be able to use it on a ball head. And the reason for that is the ball head just does not hold it steady. The weight of the lens just makes that ball head kind of creep. And you're going to be looking through the viewfinder and you're going to see that horizon line moving because it just doesn't stay in one place. So to get around that, you have to use a heftier tripod head, and in my case I have a gimbal head here, and that works really, really well. Okay, so the other thing to think about is that with the telephoto you get more shake, but since you have it on a tripod, that's not an issue. And then the other thing to think about, you always hear that telephoto lenses have lower depth of field than wide-angle lenses. While that is true, in other words, at a given aperture, the sharpness is not going to be as wide throughout the frame with a telephoto as it would be with a wide-angle. However, if you're using the telephoto for landscape, then what's happening is you're not going to have a prominent foreground. Everything you're shooting is going to be far, far away. So that issue is no longer an issue. I find that if I shoot with an aperture of f8 to f16 sometimes, sharpness is always there throughout. Okay, so I hope that I convinced you that using a telephoto for landscape can really expand your horizons. And the advantages, there's several advantages, and you can still get those panoramic shots with these telephoto lenses. You get a more realistic view of the scene as well. So so get out there and experiment with your telephoto and have fun. So I appreciate you looking on, and I also appreciate your subscription, your likes. Stay tuned for the next one.